The suffocating scent of hothouse lilies and ambition clung to the air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was a fragrance Elijah Washington knew well, the olfactory signature of New York's philanthropic elite. Conversations, murmured behind hands holding champagne flutes like shields, were transactions masked as pleasantries. Here, power was the primary currency, and charity was its most elegant laundering service. Elijah stood near the stage, a silent island in a sea of tuxedos and couture gowns, his own Tom Ford suit a piece of dark, quiet armor. He was to be the final honoree of the evening, the recipient of the Vanguard Award for Social Innovation, a recognition of his foundation's work in funding STEM education for underprivileged youth. His daughter, Zara, had called just an hour before. "Break a leg." "Dad," she'd said, her voice bright with the easy confidence he'd worked his entire life to give her. "Just don't actually break one. I'm not flying back from Stanford to push your wheelchair." He'd smiled. "I'll try to remain ambulatory. How's the quantum computing thesis?" Assembling itself one incomprehensible equation at a time. Mom would have loved it. The mention of his late wife, Maya, was a familiar, gentle ache. She would have loved this, not the pomp, but the purpose. She would have seen through the performative generosity to the genuine good being done. And she would have held his hand, her warmth a steady anchor. Now, he felt her absence as a cool space beside him. Mr. Washington, a young event organizer with a frantic smile and a headset, touched his arm. "We're ready for you. 5 minutes." Elijah gave a slight nod, his expression a carefully constructed mask of placid composure. Inside, his nerves were a low thrum. He wasn't a man who sought the spotlight, but he understood its utility. This award wasn't for him. It was for the kids in his programs. It was a signal to other men and women in rooms like this that investing in forgotten communities was not just charity, but a strategic imperative. He watched the current speaker, a senator with meticulously coiffed silver hair, drone on about civic duty. The applause that followed was polite, conditioned. Then, the host, a famous news anchor, returned to the podium. "And now, for our final honor of the evening," she began, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "The Vanguard Award. This year, we recognize a man whose life is a testament to the power of resilience and vision. From the south side of Chicago to the heights of global industry, Elijah Washington has not only built an empire, but has dedicated himself to ensuring the ladder he climbed is extended for others to follow." A tasteful video montage played on the massive screens flanking the stage images of the Washington Industries headquarters. A gleaming spire of glass and steel, photos of Elijah with Zara, their smiles genuine and unguarded, and clips of students in the Foundation's labs, their faces alight with discovery. Elijah felt a swell of quiet pride. This was his life's work. This was Maya's legacy. As the video concluded, the anchor gestured toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a true titan and a genuine humanitarian, Mr. Elijah Washington." The ballroom erupted in applause. The sound washed over him as he made his way to the stage, each step measured and deliberate. He shook the anchor's hand, accepted the heavy crystal award, and turned to face the audience, a constellation of powerful, expectant faces. He adjusted the microphone, the familiar ritual centering him. "Thank you," he began, his voice calm and steady. "I am deeply humbled to accept this." He never finished the sentence. A single voice cut through the applause from the back of the room. "A humanitarian. This man is a fraud." A collective gasp sucked the air from the ballroom. 1,000 heads swiveled in unison. A man was striding down the central aisle, his face a mask of righteous fury. He was impeccably dressed, his suit as fine as Elijah's. But he moved with a predator's disruptive energy. It was Arthur Vance, CEO of Vance Global Holdings, a ruthless competitor in the logistics and technology space. Their paths had crossed, always contentiously, in boardrooms and at industry conferences. Security guards moved to intercept him, but Vance waved a sheaf of papers in the air. "Before you throw me out." Perhaps the board of this esteemed foundation would like to see these bank statements, internal ledgers, proof that Elijah Washington's foundation is nothing more than a slush fund to hide profits and evade taxes. The room descended into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Phones emerged, their small red lights blinking as they began to record. On stage, the host looked utterly flummoxed, her professional poise shattered. Elijah stood perfectly still. He did not flinch. He did not speak. His gaze was fixed on Vance, his mind a maelstrom of calculation. This was an ambush, a meticulously planned, professionally executed character assassination on the grandest possible stage. "This man speaks of lifting up communities." Vance boomed, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "While he siphons money that should be going to scholarships, to labs, to children, he builds his pristine reputation on a foundation of lies." Vance was close to the stage now, his eyes burning with a hatred that felt deeply, unnervingly personal. He looked directly at Elijah, his lip curling into a sneer. "But that's always been your way, hasn't it? Eli, always finding a way to save yourself while everything around you turns to ash." The name, Eli. No one had called him that in 30 years. And the phrase "turns to ash." It was a key turning in a lock deep within his memory, a lock he had spent a lifetime trying to seal. Suddenly, he was no longer in the grand ballroom of the Met. He was a boy of 16, standing on a cracked sidewalk in Chicago, the night air thick with the acrid smell of smoke and despair. He could hear the sirens, see the orange glow painting the undersides of the low clouds, and feel the phantom heat of a raging fire on his face. He could hear a man's voice, raw with grief and rage, screaming those exact words at him. The memory was a physical blow, a ghost punch to his solar plexus. For a fraction of a second, the world tilted, the glittering ballroom dissolving into a nightmare of smoke and shadows. He felt a tremor in his hand, the one holding the heavy award. He forced the memory down, shoving it back into the steel-lined vault where it lived. He straightened his spine, his gaze clearing. He met Vance's triumphant, hate-filled stare with an expression of unnerving calm. The entire room was watching, waiting for him to crack, to protest, to crumble. He did none of those things. With a slow, deliberate movement, he placed the crystal award on the podium. He leaned into the microphone, his voice devoid of emotion, a flat, quiet counterpoint to Vance's theatrical fury. "Mr. Vance has made some serious allegations," Elijah said, his words cutting through the chaos. "And they will be answered. Not here. Not like this." He looked out at the sea of shocked faces and recording phones. "I will be cooperating fully with any and all investigations that will undoubtedly follow this public spectacle." He paused, letting the weight of his composure settle over the room. "And I will be pursuing every available legal remedy against Mr. Vance for defamation." His eyes found Vance's again. There was no anger in his expression, only a chilling, absolute certainty. "You have made a grave miscalculation." Without another word, Elijah Washington turned and walked off the stage, leaving behind a shattered evening, a tarnished award, and the deafening silence of 1,000 unanswered questions. the world saw a man under siege. But Elijah's unnatural calm was not the product of shock. It was the quiet hum of a machine of war. Dormant for decades, being brought online. Arthur Vance had not merely attacked his reputation, he had resurrected a ghost. And for that, there would be a reckoning. The silence in the back of the armored Cadillac was as dense and heavy as the tinted windows that sealed Elijah off from the world. Outside, the lights of Manhattan blurred into streaks of gold and white. A city oblivious to the tectonic shift that had just occurred in his life. He stared out at the passing landscape, but his mind's eye was still fixed on Arthur Vance's face, contorted with a venom that felt ancient. "The board is in full panic mode," said the voice from the passenger seat. Kesha Reynolds, his executive assistant, chief of staff, and strategic right hand, was staring at her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. At 34, with a Wharton MBA and an intellect that moved at the speed of light, she was the operational core of his world. "The Foundation's lawyers have been called. Our PR team is drafting a holding statement. The videos from the gala have over 1 million views already. Your Vanguard fraud is trending." Elijah remained silent, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He was breathing slowly, deliberately, a mindfulness technique Maya had taught him. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. It was a way to impose order on internal chaos. "The documents Vance was waving around are forgeries," Keisha continued, her tone clipped and efficient. "Good ones. But forgeries. Our CFO confirmed the account numbers don't exist. But it will take time to prove. The damage is in the accusation, not the reality." She finally looked back at him, her sharp gaze softening with concern. "Elijah, are you all right?" "He called me Eli," Elijah said, his voice quiet. Kesha frowned. "What?" "Arthur Vance. On the stage. He called me Eli." The significance of the name hung in the air between them. For the 10 years Kesha had worked for him, she had only ever known him as Elijah or Mr. Washington. He had built the name Elijah Washington as deliberately as he had built his company brick by brick, deal by deal, success by success. It was a name that commanded respect. Eli was a ghost, a boy he'd left behind in the smoky ruins of his youth. "And he said," Elijah's voice faltered for a barest moment, "save yourself while everything around you turns to ash." Kesha's professional mask dissolved completely. "Elijah, what is this? This isn't just a corporate attack, is it?" "No," he said, the single word heavy with 30 years of unspoken history. "This is personal." The car pulled into the private garage beneath his penthouse apartment on Central Park West. The world he had constructed for himself was one of quiet. Minimalist luxury, cool marble floors, vast expanses of glass, and curated art that spoke of control and order. It was a fortress designed to keep the chaos of his past at bay. Tonight, the walls felt thin. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park, a dark carpet of trees stitched with the glittering lights of the city. He could feel Maya's presence in the room's stillness. She was the only person who had known the story of the fire, the only one who had understood the guilt he carried like a shard of glass in his heart. With her gone, he was the sole keeper of the memory. Kesha followed him into the living area, tablet still in hand. "I've cross-referenced every interaction we've ever had with Vance Global, every deal we competed for, every conference. There was always friction, but nothing to suggest this level of personal animosity. It's unhinged." "He's not unhinged," Elijah said, turning from the window. "He's focused." This was a precision strike. He thought of the constant. Subtle slights he'd navigated his entire career. The backhanded compliments about how articulate he was. The club members who assumed he was staff. The board members who second-guessed his decisions with a deference they never showed his white counterparts. He had learned to absorb those paper cuts, to treat them as the cost of doing business in a world not built for him. This, however, was not a paper cut. This was a stiletto blade aimed at his jugular. His phone buzzed. It was Zara. He ignored it. He couldn't speak to her yet. Not until he had a plan. He needed to be her father. The steady, unshakable man he'd always been for her. He couldn't let her see the ghost that Vance had just dragged into the light. "What do we know about Vance's history?" Elijah asked, his voice shifting back to the familiar cadence of a CEO. Kesha was already pulling up files. Arthur Vance, born in Boston, old money family, Exeter, then Harvard, inherited his father's shipping company and aggressively expanded it into global logistics and tech. Ruthless reputation. Several hostile takeovers on his record. Divorced, no children. He's a blank slate personally. Very private. That's the official story, Elijah mused. I want the real one. I want to know where he was before Boston. I want to know what his father really did for a living. I want to know his mother's maiden name. I want to know who he was before he became Arthur Vance. Kesha's eyes widened slightly as she understood his implication. You think the entire identity is a construct. I think a man with a 30-year grudge doesn't just appear out of nowhere, Elijah stated. He's been hiding in plain sight. Waiting. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Washington. A Mr. Finn is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Elijah glanced at Kesha. She nodded. Finn was his private investigator, a former FBI agent with an almost supernatural talent for discretion and a network that reached into the darkest corners of the city. He kept Finn on a quiet, permanent retainer for just such a storm. Send him up, Elijah said. Moments later, Finn entered the apartment. He was a small, unassuming man in a rumpled suit, the kind of person who could disappear into any crowd. He carried a single manila folder. Elijah, he said, foregoing pleasantries. I came as soon as I saw the news. I think I know why Vance did what he did. He opened the folder and laid a single, grainy, black and white photograph on the marble coffee table. It was a class picture from a public school in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood, dated 1993. In the back row stood a skinny, 16-year-old boy with a guarded expression and clothes that were a size too big. It was him, Eli. Finn's finger tapped the face of another boy in the front row. This one was smiling, but there was a hardness in his eyes that didn't match his grin. He had a shock of unruly dark hair and a pugnacious set to his jaw. Recognize him, Finn asked. Elijah stared at the face. The years had changed it, hardened it, buried it under layers of wealth and power. But the eyes were the same, the resentful, hungry eyes of a boy who believed the world owed him something. Artie, Elijah breathed. Artie Vanchik. Bingo, Finn said. Arthur Vance was born Arthur Vanchik. His family's bakery was in the same community building as your grandmother's tailoring shop, the building that burned down in the summer of '94. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. The public humiliation, the personal nature of the attack, the specific, venomous words. This wasn't about business. It wasn't about corporate rivalry. This was about a fire that had destroyed one boy's life and, in a strange, tragic way, had forged another's. Elijah looked at Kesha, whose face was a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. This isn't a defense, he said, his voice low and cold. This is a war. Vance didn't just attack my company. He came after my history, my family. He picked up his phone and finally called Zara back. When she answered, her voice fraught with worry. He was the calm, steady father she had always known. "Sweetheart, I'm fine," he said. "There's been a misunderstanding. A business dispute that got ugly. Don't worry. I'm handling it." After he hung up, he turned back to Kesha and Finn. The mask of the father was gone, replaced by the face of a general preparing for battle. "Kesha, I want you to start a quiet, internal audit of Vance Global. Use our top forensic accountants. I want to know where every dollar comes from and where every dollar goes. There are always cracks in a facade like the one he's built." "Already on it," she confirmed. "Finn," he continued, turning to the investigator, "I want everything on Artur Vanchik. I want to know how he got from the ashes of Englewood to the boardrooms of Manhattan. Who helped him? Who did he step on? I want to know every secret he has. Because a man who reinvents himself so completely is a man with things to hide." "Consider it done," Finn said. Elijah stood and walked back to the window. The city light seemed harder now, colder. Arthur Vance had spent 3 decades meticulously crafting a weapon to destroy him. He thought he'd launched a killing blow tonight. He was wrong. He had only reminded Elijah of a promise he had made to himself as a boy. Standing in the ruins of his world, he would never be helpless again. "He wants to turn my life to ash," Elijah murmured, more to himself than to the others. "He has no idea what it's like to be forged in fire." The first countermove had to be surgical. In the war for narrative, the initial response was critical. While the world saw a philanthropist accused of fraud, Elijah had to project strength, not defensiveness. The day after the gala, he and Kesha convened a war council in the 48th floor conference room of Washington Industries, a glass-walled cage suspended above the city. Present were his lead counsel, his head of PR, and his chief financial officer. "The consensus is a full-page ad in the Times and the Journal," said Anya Sharma, his PR head. "A strong denial, character references from respected figures, and a promise of transparency." Elijah shook his head. "No, that's what they expect. It's defensive. We don't play defense." He looked at his CFO, a stoic man named Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, I want you to authorize a third party, top-tier firm Deloitte or PwC to conduct a complete, independent audit of the foundation's finances. I want the results made public. Every line item, every transaction." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Elijah, that's unprecedented. It will expose all our confidential donor lists, our investment strategies." "Good," Elijah cut in. "We have nothing to hide. Transparency isn't a promise. It's an action. We will show them our books before they even have a chance to subpoena them. Anya, your press release won't be a denial. It will be an announcement of a voluntary, public audit." It was a bold move, turning an attack on his integrity into a demonstration of it. It was also a gamble. Even the cleanest foundations had gray areas, transactions that could be misinterpreted. But Elijah knew his books were clean. Maya had overseen the foundation's setup with meticulous, scientific precision. While the corporate machine moved into place, Elijah's real focus was on the shadow war. Finn began his deep dive into Arthur Vance's past. His first report arrived via encrypted message 3 days later. Artur Vanchik and his parents disappeared from Chicago a month after the fire. No forwarding address, no official records until Arthur Vance appears on the admissions roster at Exeter 2 years later. With a trust fund of unknown origin and a fabricated backstory about deceased parents from Boston's elite. The money is the key. Finding its source is my top priority. Elijah's first attempt at direct leverage was aimed at Vance's business. He knew Vance Global was a finalist for a massive Department of Defense logistics contract, a deal that would solidify Vance's position as an industry leader. Elijah instructed his own lobbying team in D.C. to discreetly circulate the news of the public scandal, raising character concerns with key members of the Appropriations Committee. It was a standard corporate tactic, using reputation as a weapon. He expected a denial from Vance, a counter-PR push. Instead, he got something far more insidious. A week later, the chairman of the committee, a man Elijah's team had been courting, publicly announced that he was recusing himself from the contract decision, citing a potential conflict of interest. The next day, an anonymous leak to a political blog revealed that the chairman's daughter had received a full scholarship from Elijah's foundation 2 years prior. It was a legitimate, merit-based award, but the timing of the leak made it look like a bribe. Elijah was in his office when Kesha brought him the news. "Vance didn't just neutralize our move," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "He used it to hit us back. He made us look corrupt. He knew about that scholarship." Elijah, how could he possibly know? The setback was significant. Not only had their political leverage evaporated, but the stain of the scandal had now spread, tainting not just him, but the very students his foundation was meant to help. His stock, which had dipped after the gala, fell another 5 points. A key investor in their new green energy subsidiary called an emergency meeting, threatening to pull his funding. "He's anticipating our moves," Elijah said, staring at the stock ticker on his screen. A river of red. "It's like he's playing chess, and he can see the whole board, while I can only see my next step." That night, sleep offered no escape. The nightmares came, more vivid than they had been in years. Smoke, thick and oily, filled his lungs, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass. He was 16 again, running through the blazing corridor of the Englewood Community Center. Heat licked at his back. He was carrying his grandmother's heavy iron sewing machine, the heart of her business, her only real asset. He passed the door to the Vanchik's bakery. He could hear shouting from inside, but the flames were everywhere, a roaring orange beast, fear, primal and absolute, seized him. He didn't stop. He ran, bursting out into the night air just as the roof began to collapse. He saved his grandmother's machine. He saved himself. He didn't look back. He woke up gasping, the sheets damp with sweat. The guilt was as fresh as it had been 30 years ago. Had he been able to do more? Should he have tried? He was just a boy. But Artie Vanchik was just a boy, too. The next morning, he arrived at the office before dawn, the nightmare clinging to him like ash. He found Kesha already there, a fresh pot of coffee brewing. She took one look at his face and slid a mug across the counter. "We're playing his game," Elijah said, the coffee warming his hands, "and he wrote the rules. We need to change the game." A longer play. Kesha agreed, her mind already working through the strategic angles. "He's expecting us to fight him on the corporate battlefield. PR, stocks, contracts. It's a war of attrition. And he's prepared for it. We need to find a front he isn't defending." "His past," Elijah said. "Finn is digging, but it's not enough. Vance built a fortress around his history. We can't knock it down from the outside. We need to find a way in." He thought back to the community, the people they had both left behind. The fire had scattered them, but they weren't all gone. Memories lived in people. "Kesha, I want you to start a new file, not on Vance Global, but on the Englewood Community Center fire. Chicago PD case number 94-38271. Get the original police report, The witness statements, the fire marshal's investigation, and I want you to track down every business owner who had a space in that building. Someone remembers something. Someone knows how the Vanchiks got their seed money. It was a shift in strategy. From corporate warfare to forensic history, they would stop fighting Vance in the present and start dismantling the foundations of his past. While the world watched the public drama of audits and stock prices, the real battle would be fought in the dusty archives and faded memories of a forgotten Chicago neighborhood. Elijah felt a subtle shift inside him. The initial shock and defensive anger were coalescing into a cold, clear purpose. This was no longer about restoring his reputation or winning a business dispute. This was about excavating a truth that had been buried for 30 years. A truth he now realized he needed to face as much as Vance did. The long game had begun. The weeks that followed were a grueling exercise in parallel warfare. On the public front, Elijah's strategy of radical transparency began to bear fruit. The independent audit of his foundation was released. A 200-page document of impenetrable accounting that boiled down to a single, unimpeachable conclusion: not a single dollar was unaccounted for. Anya's PR team spun it masterfully, framing Elijah not as a victim, but as a new standard-bearer for corporate integrity. The narrative slowly began to shift. The stock stabilized. But behind the scenes, the shadow war was a frustrating grind. Vance's fortress was formidable. Kesha's forensic accountants found that Vance Global's finances were a labyrinth of offshore holding companies and shell corporations. Technically legal, but designed for maximum opacity. "He's a ghost," Kesha reported, scrolling through complex diagrams on the conference room's smart screen. "His money moves through the Cayman Islands, to Switzerland, to a trust in Liechtenstein. It's clean, but it's untraceable. It's like it was designed by someone who never wanted anyone to find its source." Meanwhile, Finn's investigation into Vance's past hit similar walls. The Vanchiks had vanished from public life after the fire. The trail was cold, dead-ending in a series of closed bank accounts and abandoned apartments. The pressure mounted. Vance continued his silent assault. A promising young executive Elijah was trying to poach from a rival firm suddenly accepted a counteroffer after Vance Global made a surprise investment in her company. A philanthropic partner in Chicago abruptly pulled their support for one of Elijah's mentorship programs, citing community concerns that had been anonymously emailed to their board. Every move Elijah made was met with a quiet, devastatingly effective counter. "It's not just that he anticipates us," Elijah said to Kesha one late night, as they pored over maps of Vance's corporate structure. "It feels like he has a source inside our organization." The thought was chilling. They launched a discreet internal security sweep, but it turned up nothing. The leak, if there was one, was deep and well hidden. Frustrated, Elijah turned his focus back to the fire. He had the old police report spread across his desk at home, the pages yellowed and brittle. The official cause was listed as undetermined, likely faulty wiring in the old building. He read through the witness statements, names of neighbors and shop owners he hadn't thought of in decades. Mrs. Gable from the flower shop, Mr. Chen from the grocery. Each statement was a small, blurry snapshot of a chaotic night. The flashbacks continued, no longer just nightmares, but intrusive daydreams that ambushed him at unexpected moments. He would be in a board meeting, and the scent of the coffee would suddenly be replaced by the phantom smell of smoke. He'd see a flash of orange in a fireplace at a restaurant and be thrown back into the roaring inferno. He remembered Artie Vanchik from the neighborhood, a boy with a perpetual chip on his shoulder. His father a hard, bitter man who worked his son mercilessly in the family bakery. The Vanchiks were always struggling, always on the edge. Elijah's grandmother, Ruth, had sometimes given them day-old bread, an act of charity Artie had accepted with a glare of profound humiliation. Kesha's work tracking down the old tenants of the community center finally yielded a breakthrough. She found a Maria Flores, who had run a small daycare. Now, living in a retirement community in Arizona, Elijah decided to go himself. The retirement community was an oasis of green lawns and beige stucco under a relentlessly blue sky. Maria Flores was a small, bird-like woman with bright, intelligent eyes that held no hint of her 80 years. She remembered Elijah instantly. "Eli Washington," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "My goodness, you were such a serious boy, always helping your grandmother." They sat on her shaded patio, drinking iced tea. Elijah gently steered the conversation back to the fire. "It was a terrible night," she recalled, her gaze distant. "So many people lost everything. Your grandmother, Ruth, she was so strong. She was sewing new orders on a borrowed machine the very next week." She looked at him. "And the Vanchiks. That was the real tragedy. That family was snake-bitten." "What do you remember about them?" Elijah asked carefully. Mr. Vanchik was a proud man. Too proud. He'd taken out a big loan just a few months before the fire to buy a new oven. He put up everything as collateral. After the fire, he had nothing, not even insurance. He couldn't afford it. She shook her head sadly. "I heard they left in the middle of the night. Shame, I suppose." She fell silent for a moment, staring at the hummingbirds flitting around a feeder. "There was a rumor, though," she said, her voice dropping. "Something I heard later. Mr. Chen, from the grocery. He told me he saw Mr. Vanchik meeting with a man a few days after the fire. A dangerous man." "What kind of man?" Elijah pressed. "An insurance man, but not a legal one." She whispered, "A loan shark. People said Mr. Vanchik owed him money. That maybe the fire wasn't an accident." The idea hit Elijah like a physical shock. Arson. He had never considered it. The police report had dismissed it, citing no evidence of accelerants. "Who was this man?" Elijah asked. Maria shook her head. "I don't know his name, but he was connected. The kind of man you didn't cross." It was a small thread, a 30-year-old rumor, but it was more than they'd had in weeks. It provided a potential explanation for the Vanchiks' sudden, mysterious wealth, an insurance payout, but not from a legitimate company. It was blood money from a crime. When Elijah returned to New York, he gave the information to Finn. Find the loan sharks who operated in Englewood in the mid-90s. Find out who was known for fire insurance. Cross-reference them with any of Mr. Vanchik's known associates. The new lead re-energized the investigation. They weren't just looking for a source of funds anymore. They were looking for evidence of a major crime. A crime that could be the seed from which Arthur Vance's entire empire had grown. As Finn began his new search, Kesha made a discovery of her own, buried deep in Vance Global's corporate filings. It was a recurring payment, disguised as a consulting fee, made every month for the past 15 years to a holding company. The payments were small by corporate standards, but consistent and meticulously hidden. The holding company was registered to a man named Sergei Orlov. "Sergei Orlov doesn't exist," Kesha told Elijah, pointing to the screen. "The name is an alias, but the bank account the money goes to is very real, and it's based in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn." Brighton Beach, the heart of the Russian-American community, and in the 90s, a hotbed of organized crime. "Get me everything you can on Orlov," Elijah ordered. The pieces were starting to connect. The loan shark, the unexplained wealth, the hidden payments. Arthur Vance thought his past was buried under 30 years of time and a mountain of money. He didn't realize that Elijah Washington was now digging with the patience and precision of an archaeologist. And he was getting close to the bone. Finn moved through the shadowy world of retired mobsters and aging informants with the quiet efficiency that defined him. The name Sergei Orlov, combined with the context of loan sharking and fire insurance in 90s Chicago, acted as a key. Doors that had been sealed for decades began to creak open. He finally got a hit from a former Chicago PD detective living in Florida, a man who had spent his career tracking the Russian mob. Finn flew to meet him, and the story that emerged was chilling. Sergei Orlov was the alias for a man named Ivan Morozov, a brutal enforcer for a Russian crime syndicate that specialized in racketeering. Their signature move was forcing small business owners to buy insurance from them if they refused or fell behind on payments. Their businesses had a tendency to catch fire. The fires were expertly set to look accidental, often using electrical shorts that were impossible to distinguish from genuine faults in old buildings. The payout was the forgiveness of the debt and a small lump of cash to start over somewhere else, a lump sum that also served as a guarantee of their silence. Finn's encrypted report landed in Elijah's inbox like a bomb. It contained a single scanned document, a 30-year-old surveillance photograph taken by the Chicago PD. It showed Mr. Vanchik sitting on a park bench, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Across from him sat a large, imposing man in a leather jacket, Ivan Morozov. Elijah stared at the photo, the entire 30-year mystery resolving into a single, ugly picture. The fire hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been Elijah's fault. It had been a deliberate act of criminal intimidation. Mr. Vanchik, unable to pay his debts, had likely been forced to consent to the destruction of his own livelihood. And the seed money that had transformed Artie Vanchik into Arthur Vance was the payout from that crime. Vance's entire life, his fortune, his power, was built on the ashes of a crime his father had been a party to. The revelation was staggering. It reframed everything. Vance's obsessive hatred of him wasn't just about misplaced blame for the fire. It was about the profound shame of his own origin story. In his twisted mind, Elijah represented a legitimate escape from Englewood, a success earned through hard work and scholarships. Vance's escape was fraudulent, paid for with dirty money. He didn't just hate Elijah, he hated the reflection of what he could have been. He needed to destroy Elijah to validate his own corrupt path. "He's been paying hush money all these years," Kesha said, looking at the evidence they'd compiled. "The payments to Sergei Orlov are to keep even Morozov quiet. Morozov is Vance's original sin. He's the one person who knows the truth." "Where is Morozov now?" Elijah asked. "Living in a penthouse in Brighton Beach," Finn reported. "He's old, semi-retired, but still connected, still dangerous." The path forward was suddenly clear. They had their target, not Vance, but the ghost he'd been paying to keep buried. But as Elijah and his team prepared their next move, Vance, as if sensing the shift in the battlefield, launched his most vicious attack yet. This one wasn't aimed at Elijah's business or his reputation. It was aimed at his heart. Zara was a finalist for the prestigious Ellison Fellowship, a postgraduate program at Stanford that would fast-track her career in quantum physics. It was the culmination of her life's work so far, a dream she'd inherited from Maya. 2 days before her final interview, the fellowship committee received an anonymous package. It contained a detailed, expertly forged report suggesting that Zara's undergraduate thesis, the one that had earned her so much acclaim, contained plagiarized data. It also included a doctored photo of Elijah meeting with one of the fellowship's board members, implying he had tried to bribe them. Zara called him, her voice breaking. "Dad, they've postponed my interview. They're launching an academic integrity investigation. My professor is standing by me. But They're taking it seriously. My whole career. It could be over before it starts. Rage, pure and cold, washed over Elijah. It was a fury unlike anything he had felt before. Vance had crossed a line. He had come after his child. The unwritten rules of their conflict that families were off limits had been shattered. "I'm going to fix this, sweetheart," he said, his voice a mask of calm over the inferno inside him. "This is a mistake. We will clear your name." After he hung up, he stood in the center of his office, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He looked at Kesha, his eyes blazing. "He's trying to burn down my world," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "So, I'm going to burn down his—" The time for subtle investigation was over. The time for surgical strikes had passed. His new strategy would be ruthless. He would not just expose Vance. He would dismantle him, piece by piece, starting with the rotten foundation of his entire life, Ivan Morozov. He picked up the phone and called Finn. "I want to meet with Morozov," he said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Elijah, that's not a good idea. This man is a killer." "I'm not asking for your advice." "Finn," Elijah stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm telling you to set up a meeting. Vance attacked my daughter. The gloves are off. It's time I had a conversation with the ghost he's so afraid of." The rage was a fire in his veins, but his mind was ice. He would use Vance's own weapon, his dark, criminal secret against him. Vance wanted to see everything turn to ash. Elijah would grant his wish. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a private room in an old, discreet steakhouse in Midtown, a place where conversations could be had without fear of electronic ears. Finn had arranged it through a series of intermediaries, a delicate dance in a world where a misstep could be fatal. Elijah knew the risk. He was stepping out of the boardroom and into the underworld. But the attack on Zara had stripped away his caution, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. He arrived with Devon, his head of security, a quiet, formidable man who stayed in the car. Elijah entered the restaurant alone. The maitre d' led him upstairs to a private dining room with dark wood paneling and a single, unadorned table. Ivan Morozov was already there. He was older now, heavier than in the surveillance photo, but the same aura of brutish power clung to him. He wore an expensive, poorly fitting suit, and a large gold ring gleamed on his pinky finger. He didn't stand when Elijah entered. He simply watched him with pale, predatory eyes, a glass of vodka in his hand. "Mr. Washington," Morozov said, his Russian accent thick, "you are a very brave man, or a very foolish one." Elijah took the seat opposite him. He placed a small, innocuous-looking tablet on the table between them. "I'm a father, Mr. Morozov, and a man named Arthur Vance made the mistake of threatening my daughter." Morozov gave a short, harsh laugh. "Ah, Artie. He always was a little boy with big, stupid dreams." "I know about the fire." "Ivan," Elijah said, using his real name. The effect was immediate. Morozov's lazy posture straightened, his eyes narrowing. "I know about your insurance business in Chicago, and I know that for 15 years. Arthur Vance has been paying you to keep quiet about the crime that funded his entire life." Elijah tapped the screen of the tablet. It displayed a single page, a Swiss bank statement showing the wire transfers from Vance's holding company to Morozov's account. "These payments are his leash, and I now hold the other end of it." Morozov studied him, his expression unreadable. "What do you want?" "Simple," Elijah said. "I want a signed, notarized affidavit. I want you to detail everything. The loan to Mr. Vanchik, the forced agreement to the arson, the payout. I want you to confirm that the foundation of Arthur Vance's fortune is a criminal conspiracy." The Russian threw his head back and laughed. A loud, ugly sound. "You think I will sign my own death warrant, admitting to arson, to racketeering? You are a fool." "No," Elijah said calmly, "because I'm offering you a better deal than Vance is." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a one-way, first-class plane ticket to a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. And this, he tapped the tablet again, bringing up a different bank statement, is an account I've opened for you in that country. It contains $10 million, 5 times what Vance has left to pay you over the rest of your life. Morozov stared at the screen, then back at Elijah. The greed in his eyes warred with his suspicion. "Why would you do this? Why not just go to the police with what you have?" "Because the justice system is slow," Elijah said, his voice turning to ice. "And what Vance did to my daughter requires a faster, more personal form of justice. I don't want him in prison in 10 years. I want him ruined, publicly and completely. Next week. Your testimony is the weapon that will do that. I'm not buying your testimony, Mr. Morozov. I'm buying the ammunition." He let the offer hang in the air. "You have 2 choices. You take my deal, disappear, and live out your life in luxury, or you refuse. And I give everything I have, the bank statements, the surveillance photo, Maria Flores' story to the FBI. They will build a RICO case. They will freeze your accounts, and Arthur Vance, to save himself, will testify against you. You will die in a federal prison. Your choice." Morozov was silent for a long time, his pale eyes fixed on Elijah's. He was calculating the odds, weighing the threats. Finally, he gave a slow, predatory smile. "You are a good businessman, Mr. Washington. You understand leverage." He picked up the glass of vodka and drained it in one gulp. "I will sign your paper, but on one condition." "Name it," Elijah said. "I want to see Artie's face when you do it," Morozov rasped. "I want to be there." The request was unexpected, a touch of theatrical cruelty that confirmed the man's character. For a moment, Elijah hesitated. Bringing a man like Morozov into a corporate setting was a massive risk. But then he thought of Zara's trembling voice on the phone, and his hesitation vanished. "Fine," Elijah agreed. "You'll have a front-row seat." With Morozov's affidavit secured, the final phase of the plan began. Kesha worked her magic, using their significant block of Washington Industries shares, along with proxies gathered from disgruntled Vance Global investors spooked by the ongoing scandal, to force an emergency shareholder meeting. The official reason was to address serious allegations of managerial misconduct and reputational risk to the company. Vance fought it, of course, but the tide of investor opinion was against him. His public attack on Elijah, once seen as a bold move, was now viewed as a reckless gamble that had backfired, drawing unwanted scrutiny on his own opaque company. The meeting was set for Friday, in the main auditorium of the New York Stock Exchange, a temple of capitalism that was about to become a theater of war. In the days leading up to the meeting, Elijah worked with his legal team to clear Zara's name. They presented the fellowship committee with irrefutable proof that the plagiarism claims were fabricated, along with evidence linking the anonymous tip to a shell corporation owned by Vance. The investigation was dropped, Zara's interview was rescheduled, and her name was cleared. But the emotional toll remained. The incident had shown her the ugly side of the world her father inhabited, a lesson he had tried so hard to spare her. The night before the meeting, Elijah sat with Zara in his apartment. He finally told her the whole story. The story of Eli, of Artie, of the fire, of the 30-year-old wound that had just been torn open. She listened without interruption, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, and finally, to a deep, sad understanding. "All this time," she said quietly when he had finished, "you've been carrying that." "I thought it was buried," he admitted. "He didn't just attack your company." "Dad," she said, her eyes meeting his. "He tried to make you feel like that helpless 16-year-old boy again." She reached out and took his hand. "Tomorrow, you're not just fighting for your company. You're fighting for him, too. Show them who you became." Her words gave him the final piece of strength he needed. He wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. He was seeking liberation from Vance, from the past, and from the ghost of a boy who ran from a fire. The climax was at hand. The stage was set. All the pieces were in place for a final, public checkmate. But as Elijah prepared to deliver the killing blow, he was unaware of one final, devastating piece of information. A detail buried in the fine print of Vance Global's corporate structure that would force him to make an impossible choice in the heat of battle. The auditorium at the New York Stock Exchange was a coliseum of polished wood and anxious wealth. The air hummed with the nervous energy of investors and the predatory focus of the financial press, who smelled blood in the water. Arthur Vance sat at a long table on the stage, flanked by his board of directors, his face a stony mask of defiance. He projected an aura of control, but Elijah could see the tightness around his eyes, the subtle clenching of his jaw. Elijah sat in the front row, with Kesha beside him, a few rows back. Nearly invisible in his rumpled suit, sat Ivan Morozov, looking like a vulture attending a funeral. The meeting began with tedious corporate formalities, a deliberate attempt by Vance's chairman to project normalcy. But the tension was unbearable. Finally, the floor was given to Elijah. He walked to the podium, not with aggression, but with a somber, deliberate gravity. The room fell silent. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and clear, filling the vast space. "We are here today because of a series of baseless attacks made against my company and my family. Attacks orchestrated by one man, your CEO, Arthur Vance." Vance scoffed audibly, a piece of theater for his board. "Mr. Vance has portrayed our conflict as a corporate rivalry," Elijah continued. "It is not. It is the final act of a personal vendetta that began 30 years ago, in a fire in Chicago." He gestured to the large screen behind the stage. The grainy class photo from 1993 appeared, massive and undeniable. He pointed to the smiling boy in the front row. "Some of you may not recognize him, but I do. This is Artur Vanchik, the boy who grew up to become Arthur Vance." A wave of murmurs swept through the audience. Vance's face went rigid, the blood draining from it. Elijah laid out the story, his voice even and relentless. The fire, the suspicious circumstances. He presented the Chicago PD surveillance photo of Mr. Vanchik meeting with Ivan Morozov. The Vanchik family's escape from poverty was funded by a criminal act. Elijah declared, arson, arranged by the Russian mob. The seed money for the company you are all invested in was not old Boston money. It was blood money. "This is libel," Vance shouted, rising from his seat. "These are insane, unsubstantiated fantasies." "Are they?" Elijah countered, his voice dropping. "Then perhaps you can explain these." On the screen, the Swiss bank statements appeared, showing the 15 years of payments to Ivan Morozov. "These are consulting fees, Mr. Vance. Or is this hush money, paid to the man who arranged the fire that started your career?" He paused, letting the evidence sink in. "And if you still require proof, The man you've been paying all these years, Mr. Ivan Morozov, is with us today." Elijah gestured to the back of the room. A camera found Morozov, who gave a slight, sinister nod. The sight of his ghost, made flesh and present in this temple of legitimate business, seemed to shatter Vance's composure completely. He sank back into his chair, looking at Morozov with an expression of pure terror. "I have in my hand," Elijah said, holding up a document, a signed, notarized affidavit from Mr. Morozov, detailing the entire conspiracy. It was over. Vance was finished. His lies, his history, his entire identity, all of it was incinerated in the public glare of the truth. Elijah had won. He had total, absolute victory. But just as he prepared to deliver the final, killing blow, presenting the evidence of financial fraud Kesha had painstakingly uncovered within Vance Global itself, Kesha leaned forward and whispered urgently in his ear. "Elijah, stop. There's something you don't know. I just confirmed it." Her voice was tight with panic. "Vance Global's pension fund. 2 years ago, he restructured it. He used it as collateral for a high-risk loan to expand his shipping fleet. If the company collapses today, and your evidence will guarantee that it does, the pension fund will be the first asset seized by the creditors. It will be wiped out completely." The world seemed to slow down. The pension fund. For a moment, Elijah was confused. Then the second part of her message hit him. "The fund doesn't just cover his corporate employees," Kesha whispered, her face pale. "He rolled it together with another fund he acquired in a merger. A small, local fund from a community credit union in Chicago. The Englewood Credit Union. It's the pension fund for the people from our old neighborhood. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Gable, their families. Their entire life savings are in that fund." The floor dropped out from under him. The faces of his old neighbors flashed before his eyes. The people who had lost everything once in the fire were about to lose it all again. Because of him. Vance, in a final, posthumous act of spite, had tied the fate of the people he'd escaped from to his own. He had made them his human shields. Elijah stood at the podium, frozen. The room was waiting. The press was waiting. Vance was staring at him, a flicker of a broken, triumphant smile playing on his lips. He knew he had laid one final trap. This was the climax twist, the moral choice. Elijah could have his total revenge, the complete destruction he craved, the justice he deserved for the attack on his daughter. But it would come at the cost of devastating the very community he had sworn to protect, the people his foundation was meant to serve. Or he could pull back, present a lesser case, allow Vance a softer landing, a way to salvage the company enough to protect the pensions, and in doing so, grant his sworn enemy a measure of mercy he did not deserve. He looked at Vance's broken face. He looked at the eager faces of the reporters. He thought of Zara's words. "Show them who you became." Who had he become? A man consumed by vengeance, willing to accept collateral damage, or something more. In that split second, standing on the biggest stage of his life, he had to choose the path of total revenge, or the path of a more complicated, more compassionate justice. His hand, holding the final, damning financial reports, trembled. The choice he made now would define him not as a CEO, not as a victim, but as a man. The silence in the auditorium stretched, thin and electric. Every eye was on Elijah, waiting for the final, devastating blow. Vance watched him, his expression a strange mix of terror and bitter victory, certain that Elijah's thirst for revenge would force him to pull the trigger. Elijah took a slow, deliberate breath. He looked down at the financial reports in his hand, the proof of embezzlement and fraud that would utterly dissolve Vance Global. He could read the first page, and the room would erupt. The company would be worthless by noon, and the life savings of hundreds of families in Englewood would evaporate with it. He thought of his grandmother. Ruth, ain't nobody better than you, and you ain't better than nobody. Her voice, a compass in his memory, destroying the innocent to punish the guilty. That was not the act of a man who believed those words. It was the act of a man like Vance. In that moment, a third path appeared. Not total revenge, not mercy, but something else. A masterstroke of strategic justice. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the board of directors, then landing squarely on Vance. The evidence of Mr. Vance's criminal origins is undeniable, he said, his voice regaining its command. It is clear he built his empire on a foundation of deceit. But my purpose here today is not merely to tear down. It is to rebuild. He set aside the financial fraud reports. Instead, he picked up a different folder. One Kesha had prepared as a contingency. The reputational damage to Vance Global is catastrophic. The stock is already in freefall. Under Mr. Vance's leadership, this company is finished. He turned to the shareholders. But the company itself, its assets, its infrastructure, its employees is still valuable. It simply requires new leadership. Leadership with integrity. Leadership the market can trust. A murmur went through the crowd. They understood where this was going. Therefore, Elijah announced, I am not here to call for the dissolution of this company. I am here to make a tender offer, effective immediately. Washington Industries is offering to acquire a controlling interest in Vance Global at a price of $1 per share. Gasps. The offer was an insult, a public execution. It would wipe out Vance and his board. But it was an acquisition, not a bankruptcy. This offer is contingent on the immediate and unanimous resignation of Arthur Vance and the entire current board of directors. Elijah continued, his voice like steel. Upon our acquisition, Washington Industries will assume all of Vance Global's liabilities, including its pension obligations, which we will guarantee in full. He had found the surgical solution. He was taking the company, not destroying it. He would gut the corrupt leadership, erase Vance from his own creation, but he would preserve the vessel itself, protecting the employees and, most critically, the pensioners. It was a hostile takeover masked as a rescue mission. Vance stared at him, his face a canvas of disbelief, turning to impotent fury. Elijah had not only exposed him, but was now seizing his life's work for pocket change, all while positioning himself as the company's savior. It was a more profound humiliation than simple destruction. A senior board member, a man who could see his own golden parachute disappearing, stood up. This is an opportunistic, predatory move. We will fight this. Elijah held up Morozov's affidavit. Fight it with what will you tell your investors? You stand behind a CEO whose career was launched by the mob, the SEC. The FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office will be crawling over this company before lunch. My offer is the only thing that saves it from being dismantled for parts. You have 60 seconds to accept. The ultimatum hung in the air. The board members looked at each other, then at Vance, who sat silently, a broken statue. They saw their careers, their reputations, flashing before their eyes. The choice was simple: accept public disgrace and financial ruin, or hand the keys to Elijah and walk away with their dignity barely intact. The chairman of the board picked up the microphone, his hand trembling. We accept the terms. It was done. In the space of 10 minutes, Elijah had exposed a 30-year-old crime, deposed his enemy, and acquired a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. The press erupted. Cameras flashed. Vance didn't move. He just sat there, a king dethroned in his own court. As security escorted a catatonic Arthur Vance from the stage, Elijah's and Keisha's teams moved in, a blur of efficiency, beginning the immediate transfer of power. Later that evening, Elijah stood not in his own pristine apartment, but in the gaudy, overwrought penthouse that had belonged to Vance. It was part of the acquisition. The place felt cold, impersonal, the monument of a man who had built a life, but not a home. He was on the phone with Zara. They reinstated the fellowship. "Dad," she said, her voice full of relief and joy. With a formal apology, "I start in the fall." "I never doubted it for a second," he said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time all day. "I saw what you did at the meeting," she said, her tone shifting. "You could have destroyed him completely, but you didn't. You saved those people's money." "It was never about destruction, sweetheart," he told her, looking out over the city lights, which seemed a little warmer now. "It was about setting things right." The fallout was swift. Arthur Vance, now Artur Vanchik once more, vanished from public life, facing a mountain of legal battles. Ivan Morozov, his testimony no longer needed in court, collected his $10 million and boarded a flight, disappearing forever. The story of the takeover became an instant legend on Wall Street. But for Elijah, the war was over. The rage had subsided, leaving behind a quiet sense of closure. He had faced the ghost of his past and, instead of letting it consume him, had used its painful truths to forge a better future. He hadn't just won a battle. He had redefined the meaning of victory. Months later, the crisp autumn air of Chicago felt like a cleansing breath. The integration of Vance Global into Washington Industries was a colossal undertaking. But under Keisha's brilliant management, it was proceeding smoothly. The company had been rebranded, its toxic leadership purged, its pension funds secured and bolstered by Washington Industries' own. Elijah wasn't in a boardroom today. He was back in Englewood, standing on a familiar corner. The block was different now, a mix of new construction and old, tired storefronts. But the empty lot across the street was exactly as he remembered it. A missing tooth in the neighborhood smile. It was where the community center had stood. He was not alone. With him was Maria Flores, flown in from Arizona, and Mr. Chen, whose family still ran the grocery store down the street. A small crowd of community members had gathered. A large banner was strung between two poles on the lot. It read, "Future Home of the Ruth Washington Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology." Elijah stepped up to a small, portable podium. 30 years ago, a fire on this spot took a great deal from this community, he said, his voice carrying in the cool air. It took businesses. It took a gathering place. It took a piece of our history. He looked out at the faces, old and young. Today, we begin to build something new in its place, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it. The Ruth Washington Center, named for my grandmother, who taught me the value of hard work and community, will be a place for the next generation of Englewood's entrepreneurs. It will have a small business incubator, co-working spaces, and a state-of-the-art tech lab for kids, funded in perpetuity by the Washington Industries Foundation. He paused. The assets used to fund this center, he added carefully, were seized from the man whose family's actions contributed to the original fire. This is not charity. This is justice. It is turning the tools of revenge into instruments of healing. A quiet, Powerful applause rippled through the crowd. Mr. Chen gripped his arm, his eyes wet with tears. Your grandmother would be so proud. Eli. Hearing the old name no longer felt like a ghost's touch. It felt like coming home. That evening, back in his hotel room, Elijah was going through a box of his grandmother's old things, which he'd had brought out of storage. He was looking for a photo of her to hang in the new center. Near the bottom of the box, he found a small, sealed envelope he'd never seen before. On the front, in her elegant, looping script, it said, "For Eli. When you're ready." His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a single, folded piece of paper. It was a life insurance policy, taken out by his grandmother on herself, dated 1 week before the fire. The sole beneficiary was listed as Elijah Eli Washington. Tucked inside the policy was a small, handwritten note. My dear boy, it read, I see the weight you carry from that night. Let it go. The fire was a tragedy, but it was not your story's end. It was the beginning. I knew you were destined for great things, and I took out this policy to make sure you'd have a start. No matter what happened to me or the shop, you never needed it. You built your own future. That is my greatest pride. The past is ash. My love. Let the wind take it. Your life is what you build now. Tears streamed down Elijah's face. All these years, he had carried the guilt of saving her sewing machine, thinking it was her only asset. He never knew she had already secured his future, that her faith in him was so absolute. And all these years, he had been haunted by a fire, thinking it was a defining tragedy, when his grandmother had always seen it as a starting point. He looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. The final ghost had been laid to rest, not by revenge, but by a grandmother's love. Reaching across 30 years, his emotional journey was complete. He had confronted his past, reshaped his present, and built a new future, not just for himself, but for the community that had forged him. The war was over. The healing had begun.